Hello, we're in England, and I want to discuss Victor Pasmore. The reason I am picking on him today is because we are sending a lot of Victor Pasmore products from England to Malta, where he lived for most of his life, or certainly a great chunk of his life. People think of English artists who scatter and run and flee England as impoverished, exiled, abscondee artists, but Pasmore was extremely wealthy even back in the 40s, and his house in Blackheath is a large Georgian 4-storey house with a large garden overlooking Blackheath. The family sold it since, but in Malta the equivalent would be a chunky palazzo in a main street. So we've got to get past this idea of this sort of fun-seeking, sun-loving artist living the good life, and on the side doing a bit of artistic work. It just wasn't at all. So Pasmore was making buildings and sculpture and paintings, and started in England, was teaching in England, was working in England, was working from his Blackheath studio, helped by his wife Wendy, helped by his son to a degree John. So this man, when he left England for Malta, was already made and was already wealthy enough to explore without any financial pressures. And his house in Malta was a modest house, but that is what the rich New Yorkers used to do. They used to have a penthouse in New York, and they would have a cottage. It's a euphemism for a small house up the river in the woods. Some of the New Yorkers would have a cottage in Rhode Island, up one of the rivers. I can't remember the name of the river. It's not the same as that, but it's a similar thing. You have this two-centre life, the source of the wealth in the urban area, and then you have this provincial place, this refuge. So you've got to look at Pasmore, where he was, what he was doing, what he had been doing, what he was trying to achieve. So he was in Malta and was churning out awful lot of product. Now I have in my previous videos mentioned Pasmore, and I'm aware that he's partially a printer and partially an artist. That seems a strange thing to say, but there's no point being an artist and making works which are too difficult to reproduce. And in mid-century, 20th century England, for sure, the images by people like John Piper and Pasmore were of limited colours and suited printing very well. And you could say the same now about Banksy and Hirst. Some of the pictures they produce have 2 or 3 colours, and for printer that is a machine, a money-making machine, because the production is fairly simple. But so you have this era when you had in Malta Fedden, Trevelyan, Pasmore, Wendy Pasmore painted as well, and others. Basil Spence was around. Richard England was a Maltese artist who was part of the clique. Cremona, other Maltese people, they all knew each other. But the printing was core to the success of Pasmore in latter years. He used printers in London, and I think he used one or more than one in Italy. And there's a book I have called The Penrose Guide, the Penrose Annual 1974, and on page 137 it discusses how the artist has to make a master copy, they call it in here a maquette, to allow the original to be captured and then transferred to an etching plate. There's a lot of academic technical stuff in this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages of text, and it does go into some detail. And there's also a book by Julian Trevelyan as well, just about printing. He wrote himself, but this is a third party talking about Pasmore. But it has interesting things in it, like, for example, when you're printing with an etching plate, the plate has to be warm. Just things I didn't know about before. So he would make these maquettes. We have 17 of them in stock in Malta, and they would be photographed for the artist, not by the artist. Some of the ones we have were taken by the son John and stamped John Pasmore. They would be augmented, meaning elements would be removed from them, and some elements would be added to them. Some elements would be added to the actual image. Some elements would be added outside the margin. You see with Pasmore, you have the image in the on the original plate, and you have extra pieces added on the outside. So he was producing these maquettes, and the ones I have were most likely the primary maquettes. Certainly probably the only surviving ones on the ones I have. And the printer didn't want areas of confusion. For example, 2 lines meeting, do you join them? Do you leave them separate? If there are mistakes and splashes, do you correct them? They did correct them, and we have these maquettes, which are a photograph, which are overpainted with gouache. And 8 out of 10 of them are pretty much how Pasmore made the picture, and some of them are quite heavily changed. And there are annotations on these images we have, and these images about this big, say 20 by 20 on the whole. They'd be a photograph of a larger works, and the printer would be given a colour to use, and it might not be the same colour as on the original painting. So you've got to understand there's an original painting, there is a maquette or a master copy, which is small, and then there are the limited editions. So what they did with the maquette is they would scale it, so they could make that size maquette bigger if they wanted to. So you'll see in this book, Penrose Annual 1974 tells you all about it. So the printing was key to the production of these limited editions, and some of the limited editions were, as we know, very, very, very big. And if you look at the maquette under some detail, you'll see very fine detail. Brushstrokes, for example, is present. If you then look at the limited editions, you'll find that some of the detail's gone. Not only because the image has been scaled up to make the larger etching, the ink and the pressing and the printing means the definition is lost. The paper, wove paper they call it, the papers bleeds the ink to a degree, and the definition to a degree does go. So I'm quite pleased with the 17 master copies we've got, because they are really close to the original in terms of the detail, other than the alterations, of course. They have annotations on the back which tells you about scaling and what to take out, what to leave in, what colour to use. And they have obvious age. On top of the 17 maquettes we bought 5 limited edition prints, 4 of which are Maltese subject. They're the Calypso Cave ones. A lot of the Pasmore work is not related to Malta particularly, though a lot of it was made in Malta and drawn in Malta. Some of the abstract pictures don't necessarily allude to Malta. People ascribe them to Malta. You have blue blobs, people say it's the sea. You have shapes, people say it's like the rubble walls. But the Calypso prints, I think you could say, are Maltese in inspiration and in subject, because you have the Cave of Calypso in Malta. We bought also, on top of the 17 maquettes and the 5 prints, we bought an original pen and ink, and it shows the breaking wave. It was drawn in 1950, and the actual picture is the one shown on the BBC production about Pasmore made in 1951. I think it's called The Artist Speaks. So that's interesting. We've got that picture shown on the actual episode of that show. So we have a lot of interesting Pasmore archival stuff, and all of it comes before some of the blocky, lurid, late Pasmore stuff, which is extremely widely available, and some of it hasn't been ever sold before. It's still with the publishers, and they just drip feed it to the marketplace. So I hope that's been interesting. The printing aspect of Pasmore, the actual mechanics of printing, is part of the understanding of what he was doing, and you have to strip away the mythology and the legend. You have to get down to the basics of what he was trying to do. There were his municipal works, which paid well. There were his early paintings, which I don't think are that good, quite frankly. They were semi-impressionistic, but unremarkable, and aesthetically not good. And then you have the abstract work, which is very good, very pioneering, quite inventive. Yes, he borrowed some things. For example, he borrowed the spirals off prehistoric temples. Of course he did. And he would have taken inspiration to a degree from other artists, why not? But he was a good artist, not suggesting he wasn't. But if you're going to have anything to say about him, you've got to have the original thought and see reality, and not just repeat what the last person said about him. Thanks for looking.